Yes, I bet it was. Actually, the developments recently, in the last couple of days with that, insofar as Robert Greene, obviously, I believe it was Anne's house was broken into a number of weeks or months ago by the police. And apparently the local Gazette, where Robert lives, has picked up the story. And he wants to prosecute the police officers because they still have not come up with the warrant, which they claimed that obviously they legally need to have, but they've been unable to produce a warrant.
This is the warrant for when they raided his house.
That's right. So he's now calling for the police to be...
He was told, and his MP was told, that there was a warrant, but they cannot produce it. And that means that they have raided his house with the complicity of the local police, the Cheshire police, I believe, stolen his things, and they've still got them. And this surely must be a crime if they haven't got a warrant to raid his house.
Of course it's a crime.
You need to get a lawyer on the case, don't you, then, really?
Yeah, well, I've heard that they've got a lawyer.
He has got a lawyer. He's got a lawyer in Glasgow, apparently. And they tried to deny him legal aid unless he went with the lawyer they selected for him in Aberdeen.
Oh, dear. So if anyone out there isn't sure what we're talking about here, do just Google Holly Gregg.
Spelled G-R-E-I-G.
Thank you. And don't do it when your children are around.
H-O-L-L-I-E.
Yes, H-O-L-L-I-E, Gregg, G-R-E-I-G. Just Google Holly Gregg and you'll see the most horrific tale that you could imagine. But this is another example of where reality is hitting the streets. Carry on with your lists. Who is immediately under Holly Gregg for you, then?
Immediately under Holly Gregg. Hold on. What do you mean? On my list? Who was the next step?
On your psychological list.
On the
things that shocked you.
The next show was Jan Eastgate and Lady Margaret McNair from CCHR, who are campaigning against psychotropic drugs, and I've had them on twice, actually. They're very good guests, and admittedly, yes, they are part of the Church of Scientology, and, I don't hold that against them. I mean, I mentioned it specifically in my first show with them, that it was the elephant in the room, and I didn't think it was necessary to mention it on the second show, but lots of people commented on the forum, on the Edge Media forum, that, you're having all these people on from Scientology. Well, forget about Scientology for a minute. The fact is that what they're highlighting, the appalling facts about psychotropic drugs, and the fact that babies in the womb are being drugged now with these drugs is something that people have to become aware of. So I think they were pretty good shows, actually.
Yeah.
And then sorry, go on.
Well, you've always struck me as such a rational guy, and yet you've sat there and heard some of the most outrageously horrific stories or mind-bending stories and research, and yet you keep a rational head throughout it all. And I know I've had discussions with you where... rational is the only word that springs to mind. So this really was what I wanted to major on with you tonight, because you've been in a unique position. For example, there's so many people out there who are following the research of Mr. A or Miss B, and yet have never met those characters. Now, I find it in the meeting of somebody that you can actually, make that contact and decide yourself how accurate or otherwise the research may be, what sort of person they are. So that does put you in a unique position, because you've probably met everybody that we could think of. Who stands out?
There are still some I'd like to interview, actually.
Who would you like to interview? Because put it out now, scream out there. Who do you want to come and be interviewed?
Pidgeon, for instance, talk about the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
Zachariah Sitchin. There are others. I don't know really. There are people I'm lining up. Michael Cremo, for instance, I've got lined up, but I'm not sure I'm going to have a show. He's the man who wrote Forbidden Archaeology, which is a fascinating book.
Yeah.
So there are that I haven't interviewed that I'd like to interview. There was a show I made with Norman Baker, MP, who wrote a book called The Strange Death of Dr. David Kelly. And I interviewed him, and the technical equipment failed, basically. I mean, you can watch the recordings and listen to them, but it's not broadcast quality. So I'm hoping that one day we might be able to fix it, because it was would have been a good show.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the death of David Kelly, and that's back in the news again, isn't it? This government is being pushed to.
It's another elephant in the room, isn't it? And people need to wake up to it.
Well, a Russian spy who's come over to our side has said very recently that MI6 did it, and that the special branch cleaned up the scene. Mm-hmm. I'm just finding it because I printed out some notes about it today. Here we go. It was in the Mail on 26th of July that a former Russian spy's dossier, which suggests that government scientist David Kelly was exterminated in a planned assassination, is being studied by the Attorney General. Boris Karpichkov, who fled to Britain after 15 years as a KGB agent, claims a London intelligence contractor linked to MI5 told him Dr. Kelly's death was not suicide. And he's emailed his evidence to Attorney General Dominic Grieve, who has already said he is concerned by questions raised by doctors who dispute the official suicide ruling over the Iraq expert's death. This is like the plane that hit the Pentagon. I mean, it's ludicrous that he could have killed himself.
Yes, of course.
The ulnar artery that he cut in his wrist, you can't kill yourself cutting that artery. There was no blood anyway. And he'd lost the effective use of his right hand, and he'd cut his left wrist with a blunt gardening knife with it. And he didn't like taking drugs, and he was supposed to have swallowed a couple of pills. I mean...
And then he managed to move his own body after he was dead, yeah.
Yes, moved his own body.
He was... wasn't he in the middle of... Carry on, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, that's like those cases in America we hear of all the time where people are, found by the police to have committed suicide by shooting themselves in the head 4 times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ridiculous. I mean, he was one of his close colleagues or friends, I think this was either 12 months or 18 months ago, came out and gave some details about a book that he was going to write, which was obviously, apparently a really, really big risk if it went public. So that could have played quite a big part in it.
Well, his book disappeared. His house was searched by the police after his death, apparently with the permission of his wife. And they removed all copies of his book from his computer and so on. So we will never see it, will we?
No, I sometimes wish that the general public at large would wake up to this, because having done what I've done, and others like yourself, we're all aware of many individuals who are out there literally risking everything. Some people are being blown out of the water, taking aid to Gaza. Everything is going on. There is a revolution going on behind the scenes, and people are literally victims of falling. And yet the public at large see these events taking place, but don't really believe. Well, I don't know what they believe. It does annoy me. How do you manage to control your frustration, your anger, whatever it may be, when you're interviewing people, if you happen not to agree with them?
Well, I ask them questions that I think that the public would want me to ask, and I never say you're a liar, aren't you? But I have said a couple of times, that you can't get away with saying that. You have to back that up with something. Mm-hmm. But in terms of what you were saying about those aid ships to Gaza, I mean, one of the people I've interviewed, who I think is one of the finest people I've ever met, and that was the former American Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who was on 2 aid ships to Gaza some time ago now, about 2 years ago, I think. One of which was rammed in international waters, and they tried to sink it. And on the other occasion, she was arrested. This is a former Congresswoman. And she was put in prison in Israel for over a week, and the American government did nothing. And what does that say to you? One of your top politicians has been arrested illegally in international waters by the Zionist state, and yet the Zionist state is so in control of your government that you do nothing about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean,
that truly is terrifying, isn't it?
Exactly. And this was covered last week. We had, I don't know if you're aware, Theo, but we had Ken O'Keefe on last week's guest. He's the former U.S. Marine who was on the the Marmara, where the 9 activists were killed. He was one of the guys who helped disarm a couple of the commandos. So we've been definitely well informed about that recently as well.
Uh-huh. Well, what an extraordinary brave man. You see, the thing is, what I do, whatever it is absolutely nothing, isn't it, in light of what these people do and the risks that they take for their fellow man. And I mean, it makes me feel incredibly humble that these people are prepared to do so much and at such potential risk to themselves. I'm absolutely literally humbled by that.
It's people like that will change the world. It would happen so much quicker if the general public would wake up and realise what is going on. But they're quite happy to sit back and wait for their pensions. Well, bad news, guys. You're not going to get one. Wake up now.
The problem is, like when I was talking about, the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, things have to get really, really bad for everyone, or a sufficient number of people to go, right, we're going to march on wherever. And, there are enough people who will take any amount of pain, petrol prices rising exponentially, taxes rising exponentially, tax on tax, which is what happens. You pay, for instance, when you buy petrol, you pay petrol duty, excise duty, and then you pay VAT on the duty. Now, I'm sorry, but that is just immoral. It is immoral. And you earn your salary and you pay tax on it, and then when you want to buy something with the money you've got left, they're now taking another fifth on top of that for themselves with 20% of VAT.
I think a lady you once interviewed called Charity Sweet would have had a word to describe all of that, if you remember.
Yes. Yes, she has it tattooed across her back. It says, it's all bollocks.
Yeah, so true.
Another wonderful woman, yes. Yeah. And of course, Brian Hoare, that she campaigns with, and an extraordinary, and Barbara Tucker. Brian Hoare, what another extremely brave man that, just above and beyond the call of duty, isn't it, really? He should have a medal, that man.
But he's done so well that they might as well have had a statue named after him for getting rid of people from Parliament Square. They set up a law just for one man. So he's done a good job. He may have took some hits recently, but he's definitely woken a lot of people up and progressed things forward for the central London. So, and we talk about this all the time, like something you mentioned a moment ago. Things have to get really bad before a significant number are willing to take to the streets and demand some action or start working together a bit better. So inevitably, is it good for us that things get worse because people are actually come around to our way of thinking when things get worse? Do we want things to get worse? Because inevitably that's when people start working together.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, isn't it? And even if it does get worse and people do revolt or whatever that they do, will we have the correct outcome?